Hello, welcome to the Fair Housing Program at Community Teamwork's brief presentation on requesting a reasonable accommodation and filling out the reasonable accommodation form for Community Teamwork's rental assistance program. This is a very short version where we're just talking about filling out the form. There is another training that is a little bit longer that talks about the reasonable accommodation process, how it works, what the features are, and then talks about this form. So anybody filling out this form is doing it because they have a impairment, whether it is physical or mental, and it's affecting the way they use their housing, and they need a change to a policy or procedure that Community Teamwork has in order to be able to use our subsidy program and participate in the housing program that we have. So we're going to talk about filling out this form. There's a few sections to the form, and we're going to go through it one step at a time. The first section is too far. The first section is head of household information. There's a couple things here. It's important really just so we know who's asking for the accommodation and we can link it to the right client or household account at Community Teamwork. It'll have the date of the request so we know when it got submitted. It'll have the head of household name, and it also has a point on here for you to include the name of the individual that the accommodation is being requested for. It could be a child or a spouse that's not the head of household. Moving on to the next step, there is no requirement that the person that needs the accommodation be the one completing this form, filling it out, or starting the request. This second section is really just here so if you are getting that help, that person can put their name on it and they can know. I help a lot of people fill out these forms. I put my name on it. I put my position at CTI on it. The real action for this form comes in this next section, the reasonable accommodation request. And there's two things that have to happen in this section. You got to say what accommodation you need. You need to articulate the change to the policy or procedure. And then you need to describe your health impairment that requires that change and connect it together. So number one in this section is enter the type of accommodation requested. Here, all you want to do is say what change you want to a policy or procedure. So if we have a 60-day rent up procedure to find new housing in this program, and you can't find that housing in that 60 days because of your health impairment, you can ask for an extension. You can ask for an accommodation to have more time, an extension, and you would just write that there. I need an extension to the 60-day rental lease up period. Number two, they ask again for who the accommodation is requested for. I don't know why it's in there twice. It is, I fill it out both times when I do these forms. Then we move on to the third box here, which is asking for you. Now we know, CTI knows in this form what the request is for. They know what the request is. We need to identify the effects of the impairment and connect it to that request. And when we do that, we're doing that in step 3. Most of them come under the second box, adjustment to Community Teamwork's rules, policies, and procedures. There's one, a standalone box above it, method of communication, which is just for issues with communication. It could be somebody's hard of hearing or deaf and can't use a phone, so they want everything in writing. It could be somebody gets really nervous talking to people and needs to have everything through the mail or email. There are a number of different, it could be somebody needs help understanding and they want to have a third person, like a family member, present when they get the information. So that's for communication. The other one is for the example we just did, an extension to a voucher rent up. And here you would have to identify what the effects of your impairment are. It could be that you have a mobility impairment, you can't find accessible housing because there's less of it than other housing. It could be you have trouble getting out and seeing places. It could be you have a lot of medical appointments and it's difficult to, or you're just often very sick and it's hard to get out in the community to look at apartments. And for those reasons, for those health impairment those reasons, you're not meeting your 60-day period and you need the extension. A shortcoming for this form is that it provides 2 lines. I've never been able to do this in just 2 lines. It does say use the other side of the paper, but I really like to go through it specifically. I think giving examples of how your impairment affects you is of high value for including on this form, because it helps the person reviewing it and authorizing that accommodation really understand what's going on. There's no obligation to put your actual diagnosis in. If I have a behavioral health issue, it might affect me. I might not be able to go out and look for housing because I can't get out of bed some days, but I wouldn't need to say I have a major depressive disorder. I would just need to say, some days because of my healthcare impairment, I can't leave the house. I have trouble getting out of bed. I can't do any number of other activities that would be necessary in finding housing. So that's box 1 and 3 are really the most important boxes on this form. You can fill out number 4, which is a place for a reliable and knowledgeable person, usually a healthcare provider, to put their contact information in so that they can verify that you have an impairment and the connection to it. These steps 1 and 3 are a client burden, right? They have to affirmatively demonstrate that they have it. If it's open, if it's obvious, if it's known, if you come into CTI and you use a wheelchair, nobody should be asking you for a letter from your doctor saying you use a wheelchair. But for all those things that CTI is not aware of, doesn't have knowledge of, it's appropriate to provide verification. And the best quality, the best evidence, the best support that you can provide is something from a healthcare provider. So that's why it's often considered a healthcare provider. You can put their contact information there, and below you can authorize that healthcare provider to release that information if it's orally. Let me say I got a couple things here that I do want to lean in on. First, if you are going to want CTI to be the person reaching out to the healthcare provider, healthcare providers are very difficult to get in touch with, especially by phone. So it can create some delays. I do recommend taking the affirmative step of you being the person that contacts your healthcare provider, getting that support in writing, and submitting that written support either with this request or as a follow-up to it. If you're not going to do that and you're going to hope that oral verification is sufficient, include the fax number or the email address of a healthcare provider. So this form can be faxed or emailed to them so the healthcare provider has it when someone from CTI tries to call. Because if we try and call and the healthcare provider doesn't know that there's a release on file for them to talk with us, they're probably not even going to acknowledge us or return a call or accept a call or say that you're one of their patients. So those, I think, are the really most important parts about accessing this form in this process. There's no requirement that a client or a tenant uses this particular reasonable accommodation form. Even do it in writing isn't a requirement. I strongly encourage it because this is has the information. If you fill this form out, you will be providing the information that CTI needs to make its assessment on the accommodation. And it's also the way CTI staff have been trained to receive and process requests for accommodation. And anything as a client that you can do to make that process easier, it's worth doing. All right. Thank you. If you want more information about this, again, we do have another training that talks a lot more about this process before we do a similar review of this form.